Have you ever had that gut feeling, a quiet, persistent whisper, that something was done to you that you simply should not let go of? Maybe someone close to you told a lie that changed the course of your life. Maybe they walked away the moment you needed them most. Maybe they slowly, subtly dismantled the very sense of who you are, and you told yourself, move on, be the bigger person. People make mistakes, so you buried it. But psychology tells us something very different. Not every wound heals on its own. Some betrayals, left unacknowledged, calcify into anxiety, chronic depression, broken self-worth, and a deep inability to trust, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. Today, we are looking at 5 specific betrayals that psychological research consistently says should never be ignored, not for the sake of revenge, not to assign blame, but for the sake of your own healing, your own growth, and your own mental health. Stay with us, because by the end of this, you may finally have the language for something you have been carrying for a very long time. Betrayal 1. The betrayal of honesty. The lie that rewrites reality. Let's begin with the most foundational betrayal of all, dishonesty. And I am not talking about someone telling you your haircut looks great when it doesn't. I am talking about the lies that rewrite your history. The deliberate deceptions that led you to make major decisions about your relationship, your future, your 50, your well-being, based on a false reality that someone else constructed for you. Psychologist Jennifer Fried, who developed betrayal trauma theory in the 1990s, found that the closer and more dependent we are on the person who deceives us, the more devastating the psychological effect. This is because the mind processes betrayal by a trusted person entirely differently from betrayal by a stranger. Our nervous system was simply not built to hold the combination of love and deliberate deception at the same time. When those two things collide, the mind does something remarkable and disturbing. It often chooses to suppress the awareness of betrayal entirely. Freud called this betrayal blindness. The mind prioritizes maintaining the attachment over acknowledging the threat, because losing the attachment feels more immediately dangerous than absorbing the lie. This is why so many people who have been systematically deceived by a close partner, parent, or friend look back and wonder, how did I not see it? The answer is that on some level, you did see it. But your mind was protecting you the only way it knew how, by looking away. What makes dishonesty particularly corrosive is a pattern many of you will recognize: gaslighting. This is a form of psychological manipulation in which the deceiver does not only lie, they actively dismantle your ability to trust your own perception of reality. Over time, you stop believing your own memory. You apologize for noticing inconsistencies. You begin to feel as though the problem is your suspicion, your sensitivity, your imagination rather than their behavior. Studies on prolonged gaslighting show measurable increases in anxiety, dissociation, and what researchers call epistemic injustice, the harm done when a person's ability to understand their own experience is systematically undermined by someone with more relational power. So why should this betrayal never be ignored? Because a lie that goes unaddressed becomes your new baseline. You begin to accept a distorted reality as normal. You carry, often for years, the psychological weight of confusion, self-doubt, and shame that belong entirely to the person who lied to you, not to you. Acknowledging this betrayal, naming it, processing it, ideally with a trauma-informed therapist, is the first step to reclaiming your grip on reality. You deserve to live in an accurate version of your own life. Anyone who deliberately took that from you committed an act that has a name, has psychological consequences, and absolutely should not be minimized or quietly forgiven without being honestly examined. Betrayal 2. The betrayal of loyalty. Abandonment in disguise. The second betrayal is loyalty. And loyalty at its core is a promise, sometimes spoken, very often unspoken, that says, I am with you, not just when it is convenient, not just when you are winning, when it counts, when that promise is broken, when a close friend shares your deepest secrets, when a partner sides publicly against you during your most vulnerable moment, when a family member disappears the instant you actually need support, something profound fractures inside you. Psychologists who study attachment theory, foundational work done by John Bowlby and expanded significantly by Mary Ainsworth and Mary Main, have found that human beings carry a deep, biologically wired need for relational reliability. We are built to reach for our trusted people when we are under threat. It is an instinct that goes back to early childhood and never fully leaves us. When the people we reach for are the source of the threat, or when they simply are not there when we reach. The nervous system registers this not as an emotional disappointment, but as something closer to a survival crisis. And survival crises leave marks. Now here is the insidious thing about loyalty betrayal. It is one of the most commonly minimized betrayals, both by the people around us and by ourselves. We are told that people get busy. We are told they didn't mean it that way. We are told that expecting loyalty makes us clingy or immature or demanding. But the research does not support that dismissal. Studies consistently show that perceived abandonment, no, the lived experience of being utterly alone during a high-stress or high-vulnerability moment, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term depression, chronic loneliness, and a pattern researchers call interpersonal hypervigilance. Interpersonal hypervigilance means you are always scanning, always watching for signs that people are about to leave, always slightly braced for the moment when the people you love prove they were never really there. It is exhausting. And for many people, it begins with a specific moment of loyalty betrayal that was never properly acknowledged or grieved. This is why ignoring loyalty betrayal is so costly. People who minimize it tend to move in one of two directions. They either stop asking for help entirely because they learn through experience that it would not come, or they become desperately, anxiously attached in their next relationships, unconsciously trying to get the reliable presence they were denied. And that anxiety often creates the very abandonment they feared. Acknowledging this betrayal means giving yourself permission to grieve the relationship you thought you had. It means recognizing that your need for reliable support is not a character flaw. It is a human constant. And it means making more conscious, discerning choices about who earns access to your most vulnerable moments going forward. Betrayal 3. The betrayal of emotional safety. The violence of dismissal, the third betrayal, is perhaps the most quietly devastating of all five. The betrayal of emotional safety. This is what happens when you open yourself up, when you share your grief, your fear, your need, and instead of being met with even basic acknowledgement, you are ridiculed, minimized, weaponized against, or simply ignored. You are too sensitive. Stop being so dramatic. I cannot believe you are upset about something so small. You are always making everything about yourself. If you have heard words like those from people who were supposed to be your safe harbor, a parent, a romantic partner, a close friend, then you know the particular kind of damage they leave behind. It is not the sharp pain of an argument. It is the slow erosion of your trust in your own emotional experience. The steady, grinding message that what you feel is wrong, excessive, inconvenient, and unwelcome. Psychologist Marsha Linehan, who developed dialectical behavior therapy, identified pervasive emotional invalidation as one of the core relational experiences that disrupts a person's ability to regulate their own emotions. When the environment in which you grew up or lived consistently communicated that your emotional responses were unacceptable, you do not simply learn to hide your feelings, you learn to distrust them. You begin to self-invalidate before anyone else has a chance to do it for you. Research in this area consistently connects chronic emotional dismissal to increased rates of anxiety disorders, complex trauma symptoms, and deep-seated shame. Not the fleeting shame of embarrassment, but the corrosive, identity-level shame that tells you something is fundamentally wrong with you as a person for feeling what you feel. What makes this betrayal so critical to address is that emotional expression is not just a preference or a communication style. It is the primary mechanism by which human beings process from painful experiences. When the people closest to you teach you that expression is dangerous, you lose access to your central healing tool. You learn to suppress instead. And suppression, as decades of psychological research have demonstrated, is one of the most reliable pathways to long-term mental and physical health consequences. If this resonates, if you recognize the reflex to immediately minimize or apologize for your own emotional reactions before anyone else can do it first, that reflex has a history. It was taught to you. In a different environment with different people, it would not exist. Your emotions were never the problem. The environment that punished you for having them was. Betrayal 4, the betrayal of boundaries. When no is never enough betrayal and boundaries, when no is never enough betrayal of boundaries. Boundary violations exist on a wide spectrum, from the relatively minor, such as a friend who consistently dismisses your stated preferences, to the severe, including coercive control, financial manipulation, or physical violation. But across that entire spectrum, psychology is consistent. Repeated, deliberate disregard for another person's stated limits is a form of betrayal with real and lasting psychological consequences. Here is what is important to understand. When you set a boundary, when you say, "Please stop commenting on my body," or "I need you to respect my privacy," or "No, I am not comfortable with that," you are making an act of self-definition. You are declaring, "This is where I am. This matters to me. I am a person with interior experience, and I am telling you what I need." When that is consistently disregarded, the message received, deep in the nervous system, below the level of conscious thought, is, your definition of yourself does not count. Your needs are irrelevant. Your no carries no weight. Martin Seligman's Foundation. Now, research on learned helplessness is particularly relevant here. When people discover, through repeated experience, that their responses produce no meaningful result, that they can push back and nothing changes, that they can say no and it is ignored, they eventually stop pushing back, not because they stop caring, but because the nervous system has concluded that effort is futile. For people who grew up in households where their no was routinely overridden, where their stated discomfort was treated as an obstacle to be managed rather than information to be respected, this learned helplessness does not stay confined to the original relationship. Stavels. It shapes how they interact with bosses, partners, friends, and strangers. They accept treatment they should not accept. They feel guilty for having needs at all. They confuse love with the obligation to be endlessly accommodating. And each time a boundary violation is ignored or minimized by others or by yourself, that neural pathway is reinforced. The message your nervous system has already received gets confirmed one more time. Your no doesn't matter. The reason this betrayal must not be ignored is not punitive. It is corrective. Every time you take a boundary violation seriously, every time you say to yourself, "That was not acceptable, and I will not pretend otherwise," you send a counter message. You begin, slowly and deliberately, to rebuild the conviction that you are a person with the right to say no, without justification, without apology, without having to earn it. That conviction is not arrogance. It is the foundation of every healthy relationship you will ever have. Betrayal 5. The betrayal of identity. When someone unmakes you, the fifth betrayal is the deepest, the most complex, and in many ways the hardest to recover from. It is the betrayal of identity. This is what happens when the people who were supposed to know you best and love you most instead set about, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, systematically dismantling the person you are and replacing that person with someone smaller, more manageable, and more useful to them. In romantic relationships, this often takes the form of coercive control, a partner who gradually isolates you from your support network, relentlessly criticizes your values, your interests, your sense of humor, your beliefs, until you abandon them, one by one, and over time restructures your entire daily life around their preferences, until one day you look in the mirror and you do not entirely recognize the person looking back. In families, it happens when parents impose an identity on a child that does not match who the child actually is. The athlete, the caretaker, the prodigy, the problem, and respond to any deviation from that assigned role with withdrawal of approval or affection. The child learns to perform the assigned identity and suppress the authentic one. In friendships and professional environments, it happens through persistent mockery, through the steady replacement of your confidence with self-doubt, through the slow training of you to defer, shrink, second-guess, and silence. What makes identity betrayal uniquely devastating is that it leaves no clean wound. There is no single moment you can point to and say, "There, that is where it happened." There is only a fog, a long accumulation of small moments, each one individually deniable, collectively catastrophic. The interest you stopped pursuing because they mocked it, the opinion you stopped voicing because it was never taken seriously, the friend you stopped seeing because they disapproved, the version of yourself you quietly folded up and tucked away until you forgot it had ever existed. Researchers studying self-concept clarity, the degree to which a person has a clear, stable, internally consistent sense of who they are, have found it to be one of the strongest protective factors against depression, anxiety, and interpersonal difficulty. When that clarity is systematically undermined by someone in a position of trust or relational power, the effects reach into nearly every domain of a person's life. Decision-making becomes harder. Relationships become less stable. Even basic questions, what do I want? What do I believe? What makes me feel alive? Become genuinely difficult to answer. This is why the betrayal of identity should never be ignored. Not because the person who did it necessarily deserves confrontation, although sometimes they do, but because you deserve to be found again. Recovery from identity betrayal begins with one radical act: getting curious about the self that was told to disappear. What did you love before someone taught you it was embarrassing to love it? What did you think before your thoughts were dismissed as foolish or wrong? Who were you trying to become before someone decided that person was inconvenient for them? Those answers are not gone. They are waiting. They have been waiting with extraordinary patience. And the work of recovery, however long it takes, is the work of going back to find them. 5 betrayals, each one distinct, each one carrying its own psychological signature and its own long-term cost. And each one, psychology clearly tells us, deserving of honest acknowledgement rather than quiet dismissal. The purpose of naming them is not to keep you anchored in pain. It is precisely the opposite, because naming what was done to you, clearly, honestly, without softening it for someone else's comfort, is the first act of healing. You cannot recover from something you have been told did not happen. You cannot grieve a loss you were instructed to be gray. At full 4. If any of these 5 resonated with you today, I want to encourage you to do one thing. Take it seriously. Find a therapist if you have access to one. Journal. Talk to someone you genuinely trust. But above all, believe yourself. Your instincts about what has been done to you are not dramatic. They are not excessive, they are data, and they have always deserved to be listened to. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you in the next one.